Hello everyone. My name is Bernadette Ditchfield. I'm the Executive Director for Mining Policy in the Department of Natural Resources and Mines. I'd like to welcome you today to the Mary K tender briefing session for interested parties. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we need to progress. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land for which we meet here today. The bathrooms are outside and to the right, and even in the unlikely event of an emergency, the EDGE wardens will come and direct us to a point of safety. Why are we having this tender briefing today? Is to ensure that all interested parties have access to the same information. So this tender briefing is actually being videotaped, and the video will be made available from the Q Tender and NRM websites. A panel session will occur at the end of the presentation for all your questions, so if you could leave your questions until the end, that would be very grateful. In addition, there is a box at the back on the table for lodging any more formal questions that you might like to ask. So the Queensland Government welcomes the opportunity to release tender MLR 2014-1. This unique tender provides an opportunity to explore for rare earth elements and other mineralised material in the mineral-rich northwest Queensland mineral province. So what I'd like to do now is just actually show you a videotape that our Minister has prepared.
Hello, I'm Andrew Cripps, the Minister for Natural Resources and Mines in Queensland, Australia. I'm pleased to invite the global rare earth and uranium mining industry to participate in an exciting competitive tender opportunity for exploration rights over a highly prospective site known to have easily accessible rare earth elements and other minerals. We're looking for a mining industry partner to explore an area in the resource-rich northwest Queensland Minerals Province that includes the former Mary Kathleen mine near Mount Isa. When the Mary Kathleen mine was operational up to 1982, the deposit contained both uranium and rare earth elements, however only the uranium was extracted. A significant concentration of rare earth elements were left behind in the tailings storage facility, with mineralised material also found in historic stockpiles and exposed in the open pit. There may also be potential for rare earth elements and uranium mineralisation at depth. Releasing this tender to the market provides an opportunity for further exploration and securing a better understanding of the geological potential of the site. Queensland has a world-class resources industry that is a pillar of the state's economy. The importance of the resources sector in driving a prosperous future for the state is strongly recognised and valued by the Queensland Government. Resource activities have been instrumental in the development of economic and social infrastructure, job creation, and the delivery of a range of broader benefits to the people and communities of Queensland. The Queensland Government is committed to supporting mining and petroleum development so the industry can continue to thrive, while also ensuring the community benefits from providing access to our resources. Of particular focus is ensuring investment in exploration activity fuels the long-term prosperity of Queensland's resources sector. I encourage interested parties to download the Mary Kathleen tender information, including the preliminary investigations on the site's geology and mineralogy, and registering for the tender on the Queensland Government's Q Tender website. I look forward to personally welcoming the successful tenderer to Queensland as the latest partner in what is shaping up to be a new strength of our resources sector in rare earths.
I'll just take you through an overview of the proceedings today. Following this short session that I'll be doing, I'll be handing over to Brad John, who'll be taking you through the Mary Kathleen geology, followed by Mr. Warren Cooper, who will look at the Mary Kathleen tender area specifically. Mirani Baker from my team will actually take you through the tender process, and then we'll be following that up closely with a probity briefing. So, in relation to the Mary K tender, the tender has been designed to encourage exploration, first and foremost. It utilises exploration and mining to address legacy mining issues and enhance social acceptance of mining. And finally, to maintain effective relationships with the landholder and the Indigenous and general community. So I will hand over to Brad John, the Queensland Government Chief Geologist, for his part of the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernadette, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The former Mary Kathleen mine lies about halfway between Mount Isa and Cloncurry in the resource-rich northwest Queensland mineral province. This is an image of the Mary Kathleen mine pit today. The deposit was discovered in 1954 by prospectors from Mount Isa. The mine operated between 1956 and 1963, and between 1976 and 1982 when it was closed. During the 12 years that the mine was active, an estimated 31 million tonnes of material was mined, including 7 million tonnes of ore, producing almost 8.9 thousand tonnes of uranium oxide, making it Australia's largest uranium producer at that time. In addition to the 0.12% uranium oxide, the Mary Kathleen mine ore contained approximately 3% rare earth oxides, making the deposit actually a rare earths ore body containing uranium. However, only the uranium was extracted during the mining operations, and the rare earth mineralisation remains in the tailings. This is an image of the Mary Kathleen tailings dam area taken in 1980. The tailings dam was operational during all stages of the mining, with the structure now comprising layers of coarse to fine-grained sediment. There are approximately 7 million tonnes of ore tailings in the dam structure, containing about 3% rare earths, and there may also be potential for rare earth elements and uranium mineralisation at other locations at the site. A recent survey confirmed the presence of mineralised material in stockpiles, reject pile areas, and exposed in the eastern wall of the pit. There is also potential for rare earth and uranium mineralisation at depth. There is thus a significant concentration of easily accessible and valuable rare earth minerals which can now be extracted under the terms of this tender. The light rare earth elements in the Mary Kathleen tailings comprise 50% cerium oxide, 35% lanthanum oxide, 11% neodymium oxide, and 3% praseodymium oxide. The Mary Kathleen deposit occurs in the eastern succession of the Mount Isa province in a structurally complex area. It is adjacent to the Birstall granite, shown here in red, and associated mafic intrusive rocks which lie immediately to the east. The deposit is within the Mary Kathleen syncline, with the western limb of the syncline cut off by a major fault, the Mary Kathleen Shear. Both the syncline and the fault formed during the Eisen orogeny between 1550 and 1500 million years ago. The mineralisation occurs in a series of lenses fanning outwards from the Mary Kathleen Shear. The shear zone can be traced for many kilometres north and south of the mine site, increasing the prospectivity of the region for more deposits. The ore at Mary Kathleen is contained within the Corella Formation, a sequence of limestone and calcareous siltstones deposited on a region-wide carbonate platform about 1770 million years ago. The mineralisation occurred when the Corella Formation was intruded by the Birstall granite, as the rocks were metamorphosed and altered by fluid emanating from the granite. The Mary Kathleen shear zone played an important role in the placement of the ore body, with its location determined by the focusing of ore-bearing fluids by movements along the shear zone during regional compression. The mineralisation occurs as high-grade infilling and replacement style veins and is interpreted to have formed in 2 stages. Initially, magmatic fluids from the burstal granite infiltrated the carbonate-rich sedimentary rocks of the Corella Formation, precipitating minerals while converting the sedimentary rocks to skarns. In the second phase of mineralisation, fluids produced by metamorphism remobilised and concentrated the rare earth elements and uranium. The ratio of light rare earth oxides to total rare earth oxides plus yttrium oxide is generally greater than 99%, which indicates extreme light rare earth oxide enrichment. The ore is dominantly allanite with minor uraninite, garnet, scapolite and clinopyroxene, and a number of rare earth element minerals. This is an image of allanite at Mary Kathleen, which is a rare earth bearing member of the epidote family. The uraninite occurs as inclusions in the allanite and garnet. Okay. Look, exploration of the tender area will enable further information to be gained on the rare earth element resource and its potential for development. Thank you for your attention, and I'll pass over to Warren Cooper now to tell us more about the site. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you all for coming today. My part of this presentation is to basically give a summary of the various aspects of what the tender information is out there to consider, but I would always refer people back to the documentation provided within the tender process for the detail on that. The other thing I should note is that in my role as acting in the Director of the Mineral Hub, that I'll be looking after all the regulatory tenure processes as they go forward. So I'll be my team or myself will be the point of contact when we get to those parts. I won't spend too long on this. As an overview of the actual site itself, as Brad has discussed it. Its location in between Mount Isa and Cloncurry, and the fact that it occurs in the Mount Isa or the Northwest Mineral Province, which is well known as a very highly prospective province. The area out within the tender is composed of 8 subblocks of about 25 square kilometres. This is a 4 north-south by 2 east-west shape, and it contains the area of the historic Mary Kathleen mine. This does not contain the area where the historic township is located, which is outside of the tender area. The area under the tender process is currently under a grazing lease under the Land Act, and is part of the non-exclusive native title claim for the Kalkadoon people. And I believe within the tender there's a requirement for people to discuss how the involvement of the native title claimants on their proposal. The other thing to consider is the area is a very active local tourist attraction. There's a high visitation rate by generally grey nomads to come and have a look at it. It's promoted regionally as a site to come and see. As Brad discussed, the Mary K operation occurred in 2 main phases post-discovery. It produced a significant amount of uranium oxide yellowcake from a single open pit operation. Total movements 31 million tonnes, including approximately 7 million tonnes of ore. Part of the operation included an ore sorting process where the ROM was upgraded prior to going through the processing plant. This meant that true tonnages put into the tailings dam are not 100% known, but we have a reasonable idea. And as Brad said, whilst it was a uranium, it was mined for its uranium, it was really a rare earth deposit that had uranium associated. At the time, we were aware that they had undertaken some work to determine whether or not these rare earths were extractable. They had done some preliminary work that indicated that this was actually possible. This is an old air photo of the site. And as you can see, the pit up in here, north is up the page, up this way. So we've got the pit, we've got the various waste rock and stockpiles, low-grade ore stockpiles, processing plant. The tailings dam sits in here, and this is the evaporation ponds that were used mainly to deal with the decant fluids and so forth from the operation, and was used extensively in the rehab to remove the water from the tailings. If we look at the key features, this is the area that's out for the tender, and you can see here we've got the pit, the various things, stockpiles and infrastructure associated with it. We've got the area of the tailings dam here. This shows the actual drilling that we undertook as a part of the studies that the state undertook, and the area of the evaporation ponds. When we get into more detail, we've got the pit. One of the things about the site is that there's a series of stockpiles and or waste rock dumps. Some of these were created as a part of the ore sorting processes that went on, or whether or not there was marginal ore taken out that currently wasn't economic at the time. Given that the operations were mining to a contract, they were trying to maximise the benefit of the ore coming out of the pits, so they were targeting through their production to meet the requirements of their contracts. Part of the main reason for this is that the tailings dam contains a significant, what we believe, and has been shown through the studies, a significant quantity of rare earths. Now, it was identified that this was an opportunity not only to address the various legacy issues at the site, but also to create a new industry within the state. CSA Global was engaged and to undertake a study just to verify some of the better understanding, to verify the material at the site and to get a better understanding of what is actually within the tailings storage facility, to confirm the historic data. They undertook some drilling, developed a grade tonne model for the tailings storage facility. 13 holes were placed into the tailings dam and collected sufficient material that enabled some high-level analytical work to be done to validate. On the basis of this, they created an exploration target under the JORC code. Now, this came as a result of their studies, the exploration target between 5.5 and 7.5 million tonnes, between 2 and 4% total rare earths. There was some residual uranium within that, and thorium as well, and that's a part of people to consider within their tender process. If you look at where the drilling was undertaken, there were 3 cells within the tailings dam. Because the operations were held over 2 periods and they did use 2 slightly different processing options, it was always going to be how much sample do we need to actually validate the historic information. Decision was made to drill these holes, to test, collect sample, test and confirm some of the information we had at the time. And if we look at an example cross-section of that, and again, all this information is contained within the reports, it validated what we believed to be contained within tailings dam as far as the rare earths, and there was some significant values within there. Of point to note is that there appears to be a basal higher grade section. Whether this is a function of the 2 different processing periods or not, we're not 100% sure at this time, but it's something to consider. But there is certainly the grades are significantly higher compared to the total. Part of the site and the point of going out through this process is to look at how we can address the legacy issues. Now, the site has been managed by the Abandoned Mine Land Program for many years by the state government, and there's a number of legacy health, safety and environmental issues associated with that site. Now, there may be impacts associated with the future use of the site for the mining operation, but we believe that there's, with sufficient environmental management and planning, that these impacts can be mitigated, managed and reduced. Now, the potential for minimising the legacy impacts is actually one of the key considerations within the tender process. If we look at the site as a whole, where the actual mining took place, you can see that there's a number of key attributes that you can basically domain out. You can look at the pit, you can look at the tailing storage facility area, you can look at the evaporation pond. Each of those have their own unique attributes that need to be considered as a part of the tender, and each of those has information supplied within the documentation. Of note here is the fact that we've been able to discriminate through the historic information, where there were what was waste tips, where there was discriminated waste, marginal ore, and various other classifications of ore stockpiles. The actual grade or material contained within those is unknown, but we believe there to be elevated values. As a part of identifying, what are the legacy issues at the site, we've, through the Abandoned Mine Land Program and through the subsequent studies undertaken as a part of developing this tender document, we took some samples were collected, and that was about trying to assess the current environmental conditions at the site. Part of this was surface sediment sampling, water sampling, surface water sampling and groundwater sampling, as well as some radiation measurements on the site. Some of the data that was collected, we'll see here that this is from the sediment sampling program. What it clearly identifies is there's elevated values above the ANZAC trigger guidelines. Now, what this means is there's further investigation required. There's, as you can see, over this side we've got the results from the pit. This is from a sample collected right on the waterline, and we've got some samples here from sediment at the toe of the tailings dam. And you can see there's some quite elevated values in there that require management and actually exceed those ANZAC guideline values. Another part of the sampling program was the surface and groundwater. Again, this has identified that there's exceedances of the ANZAC guidelines for the species protection and also for the livestock. What this means is that further investigations may be required to understand the impact that it actually has, not only on the ecology, but actually on the livestock, whether or not there are impacts for their health. This is all part of the site. There's some, there's a number of legacy issues at the site that certainly do need to be managed going forward, and as a part of the tender process, we're looking at the options to do so. The other issue at the site, of course, is radiation. Now, given that it was a uranium mine, there's a number of factors involved in there. We can see by the sampling that has been taken, these are point samples collected off the ground, just to give an indicative feel for the levels that are there. We can see that, we can see there's some significant point highs around and some elevated values. We're certainly aware that there's some elevated values retaining in the benches. For safety reasons, the access to those sites is pretty difficult. But that's a part of the general conditions of the site, and again, a lot of this information is provided in the documentation within the tender. Right, so when we go to what are the key considerations for addressing these legacy issues? Now, this site has been managed by the state under the AMLP for a while, and a part of that we look at the various risks and hazards at that site that need to be managed. From the state's perspective, these key considerations evolve around the safety hazards from the existing infrastructure, which includes the pits and the stockpiles. Most of the stockpiles have the natural angle of repose on the walls, on the tipping faces, so there's obvious safety issues with there. There's the impacts that the site has on the surface and groundwater, both on the site and downstream. And as a result of that, it's been identified that there is a potential impact and a risk to the health of cattle as a result of that contamination. Now, if and when future mining takes place on that site, obviously subject to a number of different studies required to be met, what are the rehabilitation requirements that we're looking for? First of all, it's about addressing the legacy issues at the site. This is basically, we will require people to comply with the current DEHP requirements and the standards for any mining operation. There's a lot of concern around how we manage the safety to humans and wildlife from the legacy issues at the site. We would require that there be non-polluting activities there, that any post-mining landform be stable and sustainable into the longer term, and that would be through an agreement in what that landform actually is. One of the specific requirements will be that it will depend on the activities that are undertaken on that site and which legacy issues are to be addressed. This is part of the negotiation that we'd like to be taking with the tenderers, the successful tenderer, on the outcomes of that process. Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to pass on to Min for the next stage.
Good morning, my name's Mim, or Mirani, and I'll probably talk to a few of you on the phone. So I'm going to outline the tender process, and bear with me, I'm one of these people who have to put glasses on and off all the time. So what we're trying to seek, or the government's seeking out of this tender process, is, as it's been well articulated by Warren, is that first of all we're trying to encourage exploration further and to stimulate the rare earth exploration in the rare earths area. But of course we're also trying to address legacy mining issues, and we're trying to do that now through utilising of previously mined areas. So utilise abandoned mines, see what we can do. If you can make money out of opening up abandoned mines, then we can use that then to address other legacy issues. Again, we're trying to look at maintaining effective relationships with the landholder and the Indigenous and general community. That's so that we can build social acceptance for the mining industry in general, and also to try and gain assurance that the outcomes that will be achieved through this process will actually be delivered, and we'll try and do that through an assessment of work plans and evidence of a successful tenderer's technical capability and experience. And there is a component, and I'll put it up here, there is a bid price component as well. Now, if you're successful for this tender, you'll be granted an exploration permit for minerals with the intent, and the government will facilitate this, to progress to a production lease. No relinquishments will be required of any of the 8 sub-blocks for a term of 5 years. And if you require an extension, that will be considered and facilitated. In addition, we will provide access to the drill samples collected as a part of the CSA Global study. Now, it's really important that as a part of that tender one, there's a whole variety of different documentation that's been provided. One of the most important ones is the tender document, this beastie here, and that's available on the Q-Tender website. But there's a whole range of other reports as well, the CSA Global report, the Coffee report, and then the Department of Natural Resources and Mines also has a series of mapping and data tools that you can have access to as well. But I'd just like to stress here that due diligence will need to be, that you'll need to also understand that other legislation will still need to be complied with, even if you are a successful tenderer, and those of course are what you'd expect with any other exploration mining activity. You need to meet the Environmental Protection Act requirements, legislation regarding native title, Mineral Resources Act, Water Act, and the other plethora of different legislation that's around this area. There are 5 stages to the tender. The first one, as you know, we've released the tender. The next stage will be the submission of tenders, and this closes on the 3rd of November. The third stage is we'll evaluate the tenders, and that will occur in November. The fourth stage is we'll award preferred tenderer status, and we'll aim to have that done by the end of the year. And then they'll go through a grant of exploration permit for minerals as through the normal granting process for an exploration permit for minerals. So stage one, as you probably well know, the tender has been released on the Q-Tender website. That's the link there. Today is a tender brief. We have a site visit available that will be on the 3rd of September in Mount Isa, where we'll hopefully meet at about midday at Mount Isa, and people will then go across to the Mary Kathleen area site, where there'll be 7 actual places to stop, and then we'll have relevant experts actually giving details about the area that's been selected. So you'll have ability to ask more questions and to have a look, and that's on the 3rd of September. Just to reiterate that information from today's sessions and the site visit and responses to questions received will be available on the Q-Tender website. This is to ensure that every person who's interested in tendering has access to the same amount of information. Okay, I'd just like to go through the submission of tenders. The approved application form is the application form you have if you want to apply for a permit, application for permit for minerals, and that's on My Mines Online. At this point in time, they're updating the forms on My Mines Online, so my suggestion is that if you could wait until later, like closer to the end of October, November, to actually apply, you'll get the more up-to-date My Mines Online form. In addition to that application, you'll need to provide us with the original copy of your submission with 4 additional paper copies. We would also like an electronic copy of the submission, provided in whatever format you have in terms of providing it through electronic means. And stress again that all the required information is specified in conditions of tendering in the tender document will need to be addressed for as a part of us to allow us to evaluate the tender itself. And the cheque, we'll also need a cheque enclosed for payment of the exploration permit for minerals application fee, which I believe at this stage is around $830. Okay, when we come to actually evaluate all the tenders, what we'll be looking at is what legacy issues a tenderer is willing to commit to and their capability in actually meeting what they have said. Again, the same is for managing relationships, what the tenderer is willing to enter in regards to managing relationships and their capability and commitment to actually meeting those requirements. The appropriateness of a work program, what you want to do and how you're going to go about doing it, and your capability and commitment to undertaking those activities, and then whatever cash bid you're willing to offer as well. Okay, stage 4 will be the award of the preferred tenderer. This will be, a preferred tenderer will be informed confidentially, and then once informed, required to meet certain requirements within set timeframes. And these include, initiate environmental approvals, initiate the native title process, whichever one you've selected, and submit 10% of the bid price. Unsuccessful tenderers will be notified as soon as we can practically do that, but no later than 30 business days. Grant of an exploration permit minerals. It's the same as granting of any EPM. You're required to have your environmental authority, indicate how native title is being dealt with, and the other requirements such as entering into a conduct and compensation agreement with the relevant landholder. In addition, we may ask the successful tenderer to enter into a deed, and that's just to provide some legal framework around actually implementing what they've said in the tender document in regards to the legacy issues, and then it will be the payment of the final balance of the cash bid. Okay, I'd like to actually hand over now to Simon Dravitsky, who will give an outline of the probity requirements we have for this government tender process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mim, and good morning to everybody. I'll try and make this as brief as possible. We thought it was relevant to have a probity briefing due to the potential emotive nature that external stakeholders may have in this process. So we want to make sure that we have a good, strong, transparent and auditable process as an outcome from this tender. Okay. Okay, so the briefing objectives today is just to give you folks an awareness of the probity principles, how we will apply them in practice, both internally and externally, and how they relate to the Mary Kathleen process. Those are the probity principles: accountability, transparency, conflict of interest, confidentiality and value for money. So, in terms of accountability, who is responsible for what, and the adherence to policies and procedures. So, this is very much a process-driven activity undertaken by the department. There's a lot of rigour around all the communications. We are very we put a lot of importance on making this open and transparent and giving everybody equal opportunity to the information, and in terms of managing the processes internally, making sure that we have all our I's dotted and T's crossed. Some accountability tips. What we have is a governance structure, and we have a documented probity plan. We do a risk analysis. So these are some of the internal activities that are undertaken in conjunction with the tender process. As I mentioned before, transparency is very important. Probity is all about having evidence of ethical behaviour in the process. So we want this process to be transparent. We want everybody to get the information they need, because that impacts on the risk profile that you folks have to deal with, and risk generally impacts on the bid price. So these are just some tips in terms of transparency. As I mentioned, we have equal access to the information for all participants, and there's very strongly documented procedures in terms of the how the process and the tender will be evaluated, and how the committee will work, and how they will report that their decisions up through the processes for approval. Conflicts of interest, that's a sort of more of an internal definition of a conflict of interest, but conflicts of interest can also occur with tendering parties. It's not a bad thing to have a conflict of interest. That's likely to happen. This is a fairly tight, small industry, and conflicts occur all the time. But what we are very keen to be involved in is understanding those conflicts and working and managing those conflicts with you, both from the government side but also from the proponent side as well. And the interesting thing about conflicts is that often they can be perceived, so they might not necessarily be a conflict, but perception is very important, and we'd like to be involved as the probity advisors in working through that process. So it comes back to transparency and auditability. Okay, now this talks a little bit about managing the conflicts, and there's sort of an inverted hierarchy here. But what we really want to do is we want to record and register anybody's conflict of interest, and we don't really want to see that escalation moving up to someone being removed from the tender, and that involves both parties internally and externally. So just a few tips in terms of conflicts. We want to have a clear definition. We want people to seek input. We're happy to work with anybody in the process, involved in the process, in terms of making sure that we can manage those conflicts. And the last thing that we always apply is what we call the courier mail test, and that is, would this stand scrutiny if it got into the public domain. So in terms of confidentiality, this is an area that, as probate advisors, we are very strict about how your information is handled in the department, how it's stored, what servers it sits on. All these things are are important to us and part of the service that we provide. In terms of confidentiality, there's a few tips there that we've put, obvious ones like Chinese walls, but also there's other issues often in terms of considering people's IP and the release of information and using consultants and how we disperse that information to get the best outcome. In terms of value for money, obviously we want to make the process as smooth and give you as much information as we can, because it's very important obviously for the state to try and maximise the value of the bid, and you can't do that if you're not privy to the information. So please make use of the questions and the points of contact to make sure that you do get the information you need to put forward your best proposal. And I think we're moving into the next area of the presentation, which is the Q&A. I'll ask Mim to come up here and just coordinate that. Thank you.
This is a question and answer time where you get a chance to drill us on anything you need. Can I ask the panel members to please come up and take a seat? And we have roving mics. Feel free just to put your hand up if you've got a question, and we can take the, we can record it. So does, am I sitting there? So, yes, do we have our first question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the department's got an indication of the environmental rehab costs.
Does somebody in the department have an indication of the rehabilitation costs? Yes.
Not really at this point in time. It would be dependent very much on the methodology used for rehabilitation, where you would put material, how you might encapsulate material. We're hoping very much that these sort of issues can be addressed as part of the reprocessing, say, for the tailings dam material, and for other material, again, as part of the mining process that hopefully will happen into the future. And as that, it will be more a part of the cost of mining rather than an additional environmental rework cost.
Any other questions? Yes.
Sorry, I don't have much of a voice at the moment. Just beyond the 5-year tenure, who owns the legacy costs that are current? So if mining doesn't proceed or doesn't fully proceed, who owns the current legacy issues beyond the 5 years?
Okay, the government, through our Abandoned Mines Land program, is addressing the legacy issues right now, and we will continue into the future. If a successful tenderer is looking at putting an operation on the site, then we'll work with them to see how we can essentially partner that. One of the things we don't want to do is scare people off by having them think that they will need to address all the legacies on the site. We realise that that could be very unproductive. However, at the same time, we want to have a win-win, both for us getting some benefit for legacies and for the company being able to have a profitable operation on the site. So we're willing to negotiate on that, and that was part of the deed that we were talking about earlier. The deed would encapsulate and frame the responsibilities and the expectations on both parties.
Do you have a pro forma of that deed available?
Not completely. We have A similar example, I guess you could say, with Mount Morgan, where we have a agreement with Norton Goldfields Limited, who are the mining leaseholders over Mount Morgan. And we'd be looking at that as not necessarily a template, but as a starting point in terms of concepts. We've also learnt a little bit from that deed, which has been in place for about 15 years now. So we'd be looking at improving on things from that as well. But that's our template. There are some commercial in confidence aspects of that, but I can check. If you leave me your contacts, I'll see what I can provide.
Do we have another question?
In the context of the legacy issues, it seems to be a popular theme already. The abandoned mines program, can that in some way form at least a baseline? Because you've been managing this asset and you know, keeping the tourists and so forth under control, but can that at least, because I'm thinking from the mindset of the successful bidder, will from day one assume the responsibilities, and then you're going to have a bunch of tourists coming up to the site. I'd be concerned that the attitude of the government, certainly from an environmental regulation perspective, would change. Is there an ability to at least use that the policies and procedures that the government has had in place under its abandoned mines program as at least a baseline? Obviously, as you progress your activities, things will change. But I suppose at least if there was a bit of certainty that, you know, you didn't have a bunch of people from the EPA camped at your front doorstep from day one, and the whole mindset changed as soon as ownership changed.
No, that's very important that will happen as part of a negotiated process. And as I said, the intent is not to just surprise the tenderer, the successful tenderer, with then saddling them with all the rehab requirements. That's definitely not the case. It's about working towards a win-win. Now, it's hard at this point in time to frame what that might be, because it'll depend a lot on the sort of activity that might be put forward. For example, one tender might be just to carry out reprocessing of the tailings dams materials. Another tender might look at that as stage one, and stage two as looking at mining the mineral resources that's in the pit and looking at what to do with that. Now, that's a much larger scope of project, and the opportunities for incorporating some redefining of stockpiles, moving materials around in that sort of process could be a lot greater. So we will have to see what you bring to the table, but at the same time we have a commitment that we are happy to come to the table and talk to you about opportunities and how we can have a win-win on the site.
Hi. I notice in here that you've got, with the due diligence with the EPA, how on board are the EPA, given that the site has these legacy issues? I mean, you could get to a point where everything goes ahead, but the EPA holds you up, or you have significant problems with them. Are they in this process?
They have been involved with this process, yes. They understand what we're trying to achieve, and so far they've worked very closely with us to achieve that. So we don't, at this point in time, envisage any issues regarding that. So, but we will continue to liaise with the colleagues in the Environmental Protection Authority, yes.
I guess in line with that, our Minister is very strong on promoting business in Queensland, and very strong on us as government agencies working together to provide service to our customers in industry as well as elsewhere. So be assured that we will do our best to work together to have a unified front for you, to let you know up front early on what the issues might be and work with you to resolving them.
Is there anybody else?
Are there any prohibitions on exporting product from Queensland?
The
And I should say, and if there are, I mean, what would be the likely ports envisaged?
Warren, I might ask you to talk on this one a bit.
No, currently there's no prohibitions that I'm aware of that would impact on this project going forward. The recent announcement of the recommencement of uranium mining in Queensland has opened the doors for the site, and rare earths are treated no differently to any other mineral.
Sean, the lady at the front.
It's pretty much leading on from that one. Has there been any studies at all or any information available on transporting of the ore from site? Any recent work done at all?
As in moving whole of ore off the area?
To avoid processing costs at site?
That is one of the options that people may choose to look at in their proposal. There have not been any specific studies around that, but we are certainly aware that is one of the options that people may consider.
Is the EPA going to allow a port in Queensland to export uranium?
It's not a decision by Department of Environment and Heritage Protection. It was a decision that was put out there and is covered off in that in the recent announcement by the Minister for the recommencement of uranium mining. The problem evolves around that their export ports require licensing. There are 2 existing licensed ports in Australia, and it has been proposed that the best opportunity lies in using that existing infrastructure.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for that. I might ask Bernadette Ditchfield to come up and to close this briefing session. Thank you.
Just like to take this opportunity to thank you all for coming this morning to this briefing. I hope you found it to be very informative and informing of your tender proposal that you'd like to put forward. I'd like to thank our technical advisors for spending their time this morning to come and speak with us. So thank you again, and just to reaffirm that there is a site visit on the 3rd of September, and we have staff here available if you would like to ask any further questions. Thank you.